Miller, PhD. Double up on the credentials as always for my ego and in hopes that you'll subscribe. I'm trying to get to the Lambo lifestyle. When you get to 1,000 subs, you get a Lambo in the mail. They just ship it to you. It's kind of like Carvana. Boom, there it is, Lambo. That's what the guys that sold me the YouTube enhancement pack, thing that advertised, right? They're like, hey, subscribe to my channel or buy my what do you call that, seminar? There we go. I can't think of the name. Buy my seminar for like $2,000, and then you get a Lambo because when you hit 1,000 subs. So apparently that happens. So just help me out here. I need a Lambo. Do subscribe to my channel. Check out my other videos and a variety of topics, exercise, sports science, journal club, book reviews, all kinds of stuff. More coming. Thanks for those of you who have subscribed. Appreciate it. We're in this together, and other cliches. All right, and hit the notification bell. Again, you can like this video too, but you can take a look at it first. All right, so a couple videos ago, I made a video, redundancy, about the difference between men and women, and how it becomes a strength and hypertrophy. Specifically in that video, is how they might train differently. And a lot of that was rooted in basic physiology, and is also rooted in research literature, and then I had a little bit of a hypothesis of my own at the end. So this video is related in the sense that we're looking at, instead of the sexes, we're looking at age. So one of the commenters, by the way, if you want me to talk about something in particular, drop it in the comments. Love to hear it. Because that's what this video is in response to, is a commenter that would like to know more about older athletes and people who are older that are training. Okay. And so this one's a little bit more difficult than men and women, which is a binary. This is more of a continuum. Okay. And so some definitions to start. First, who am I calling older? Well, I'm going to use the 35 year, right? 35 years old as older. I realize some of you are like, hey, I'm like 38 and I'm rocking it. Cool. This is why it gets difficult, but I'm using 35 because when it comes to like sports, that's usually the age that's a master's athlete. Okay. So let's assume the athlete's getting older. They're past their prime and peak in terms of performance. It doesn't mean they're past their prime and peak as a person. It just means probably in performance. If you look at most sports, that's when, most athletes are on the downhill side of their careers, if you're looking at professional athletes and so forth. Not all. I realize there's always exceptions, but so I'm going to call somebody who's 35 years and older an older adult. Now, like if you look at testosterone levels in men, like at 40 it tends to start to decline, and at 70 it really declines. Okay, so there are other time points. That's why this is more of a continuum, and there's different stages here we'll talk about, and when somebody's entered into the training cycle, right? But for now, that's an older adult. Understanding that a 55-year-old and a 65-year-old are going to be different. A 45-year-old and a 35-year-old are going to be different. Okay, and then the next thing, which I'll add that variable now, is when did you start training? So if you started training as a 70-year-old, can you see improvements in strength and hypertrophy? Of course. Yeah, the rate, and this is important, the rate of improvement is going to be slower as a result of being older, and I'll explain why, one of the variables we'll look at here. But yeah, you can see gains. However, if you've been training your whole life, you've been pushing it, say you're a power lifter, and you've been pushing it your whole life as much as you can, will you see improvements as a 7-year-old? Unlikely, right? What you're actually trying to do at that point is just hold on, right? It's it's like a master's athlete that's been training for a while is pushed up the lifts, right, to their height, and now they're just trying to hold on as the age gets older and older, and it's basically who can hold on to their strength the longest as you age. If somebody's been training for a long period of time, because you don't see 45-year-olds dominating the professional sports scene. There's a reason for that, because they're older, right? I mean, that when we age, we're slower, we're weaker, right? We're stiffer, right? Those things. Now, again, does it mean that we can't still be athletic or still be physically fit, be shredded, all those type of things? Yes, you can do those things. It just gets harder. Will you see gains though if you've been pushing your life? No. So I think it's important to understand the difference between that. If you started later in life training frequently, if you're in your mid 40s or late 40s and you started training, you can still see positive improvements. I don't know where that'll stop. I have no idea. The rate of improvement early on will be faster than it will be later, but the total rate early on will be still slower than it would have been if you were 24. Okay. So the encouraging thing is if you're starting at 50, if you're starting at 55, you can still see improvements. And early on, you'll have that honeymoon period when it's like, man, I'm really making a lot of gains. Wonderful. And it's kind of those things you don't know what you don't know. So it's like, I don't know what I would have done at 24. So this seems really great. Okay. Then don't worry about it. Just, right. Understand that, when you're older, you're going to see less improvement. Those of you who've been training a while, you know that, and this is a little bit harder. I know this for myself, is you can't do things like you used to, right? You can't do things like you used to. You can't push as hard as you used to. And so let's get into this variable. I'm going to try to, I want to define things. That was just the definitions. I wanted to then talk about some variables that you need to consider as somebody who's older that's training, okay? Athlete or not. All right. Number one is volume. And it's related to frequency as well. Frequency is how many times you train per week or per time period. We'll just say per week. That's the typical way of defining it. And we'll look in volume. So, a 24-year-old can tolerate more volume, just like a woman can tolerate more volume than a man, right? When we talk about age now, men and women, right? An older woman can't tolerate as much volume as a younger woman. An older man can't tolerate as much. Okay, our ability to recover is reduced. Okay, so I have a good friend who, he's a friend that I don't know if he's a good friend. He's a friend. He's in his 60s and he still squats 600 pounds. Right, pretty strong dude. So again, he's gifted and strong, and he's maintained his strength over time, but it's declining with his age. Ridiculously strong still, but we were talking a while back, and he said, when I was younger, I could squat maybe twice, maybe heavy twice a week, and then as he got kind of in prime, like typical once a week, he said, now I'm about 10 days, right? Every 10 days I can go heavy, and it's starting to get further and further apart. And I've noticed that in my own training is, I'm definitely 7 days. And I have to volume cap certain exercises. So and more of it's injuries, and which is part of being older. But like I only have so many reps. Like in a clean, I can only do 7 reps really that are if I'm doing a heavier day. And after that, bad things tend to happen, right? So I have to volume cap, and that's something that's if you've been training a while, that's going to be harder to understand and harder to kind of accept. Is that your volume is going to have to be more carefully monitored. You can't push really, really hard on a Monday. You could push hard on a Monday, but don't expect then to come back on a Thursday and be able to go at it again like you were when you're 20. Right? It might take you another week, so you might have to be a little smarter on that Monday. Right? You're gonna have to be more. If you're interested in strength and power gains, you're gonna have to be more strategic about your volume and when you use it. So greater recovery time, and it's hard for. I don't have a hard and fast rule. But in general, masters athletes, I try to keep them, like I'm talking about weightlifting, no more than once a week heavy. And then the other days are significantly lower, right? And monitoring if they're recovering. Where you might say, well, isn't that fits like Louis' method of heavy? Yeah, but I'm saying like one heavy day per week, period. Like not per exercise, but per week. So, and not doing like heavy squat day, heavy clean day. I'm just using weightlifting. Heavy clean day, heavy squat day, heavy snatch day. I'm saying there's only one heavy day. So that may be something you have to consider. Again, those other days are moderate and light load and things like that. But that's what I'm talking about when I say one heavy day. I'm not saying one heavy day per exercise. So that's something you had to move to over time. Now, if you're 40 years old, you might be able to tolerate more of a traditional program. Okay. So volume, related frequency, you might have to spread out how many times you can go at it. When it comes to volume in general, if you've been training a long time, if you want to see skeletal muscle mass gains, they're going to be harder to come by as you age, right? You, again, might be just kind of fighting age as you get older then. So in other words, as you're getting older, you want to maintain the skeletal muscle mass you have and the volume in which you train, right? In order to do that, you may notice over time that you can't tolerate it as much. Accept that, okay? Accept that and do what you can. All right. So if you're doing 20 sets per week of a particular exercise and you are no longer recovering from that, how do you know if you're not recovering? The strength in those exercises go down. You notice a lot of joint stiffness that doesn't clear from one session to the next. So if you're doing a split routine or you're doing a whole body routine, and let's just take the chest, for example. You're doing a lot of pressing, and you used to be able to do 20, 25 sets per week for hypertrophy. And, before it was no big deal. You could recover. If you're sore, you cleared it. Now though, you notice your strength levels in your incline press, your bench, or whatever is continually dropping, even after a deload. You're just not recovering from it. So you might have to look at it and say, okay, if I want to maintain quality volume in my program, I'm starting to go to failure on a lot of these exercises that I didn't before. Those 45s used to be, I could crank those 2 to fail. Now I'm to failure all the time. Okay, you can obviously lower the weight too, but you might have to consider lowering the volume as well. If you lower the weight and you're like, okay, I'm doing 40s, but I'm still not really recovering, and that strength is just in a slippery slope, declining all the time, it might be time to pull back. And that, you can start with 2 sets even and see if that helps. And it doesn't sound like many, but it might be enough. And you pull back there, right? And see if that is your new maintenance range. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't times you could push harder. And I'll get into the next thing in a second here. But typically as an older adult, you're busier. So if you have children, if you have grandchildren, if you got a busy job, or you're running a business or whatever it might be, you're probably going to be busier as well. And so, you're going to have to look at your schedule and say, can I push now? Because if I have better sleep, maybe I could go back up to 25 sets for a cycle. Okay. Knowing that it's just going to be for a cycle, right? And it's during a time when I have the ability to recover. Otherwise, I'm just going to have to accept that I need to go down to 20 sets. I'm really busy and I don't have the time to recover. And right, this is just the way it's going to be for maintenance. Okay. So there's just going to, all I'd say, there's going to have to be more careful consideration when it comes to volume. I mentioned just a second ago of, going up and down in your volume from mesocycle to mesocycle, right? There's going to have to be more of that rather than the linear kind of grind upwards, which even for a younger person, you can't keep that forever, obviously, but the need to cycle down, right, in volume and then back up again, it might become more important over time as you age. Okay. And that plays into, I mentioned the longer periods of recovery. That plays in this idea of you just may need longer periods of recovery. So, your deload week may need to be longer than it had been in the past. So instead of 7 days, maybe from a hard cycle, if you're going to keep a hard cycle, if you're in athletics, maybe you might take 10 days, right? Or you're going to have to deload more significantly in the sense of you're going to have to pull the volume down more than 60%. I mean, your sessions might be really shorter than they were before, because the total volume for let's say, I'm going to use like clean and jerk. You might volume down to, let's say 8 reps, but maybe you're doing like 4 now. You're like, well, it wasn't even worth going to the gym. Well, that's how you're going to recover. So those are realities. It's a little bit harder, again, when you have been training to see some of those numbers start to drop. But if you fight against it, like if you just say, I'm not going to give in, okay, you're going to get run down and you increase the likelihood of injury. Okay. It's kind of like think of it as like a phased retreat. So, instead of just, turning your back and sprinting backwards and not doing anything or pulling back too far, you're saying, I'm going to back up a little bit, right? And see if that allows me to recover. A little bit could be a couple sets per week. Or you could do something that's more, I mentioned a phase, is you could drop back significantly and then come back up to where you were. But on average, you still have dropped 2 sets per week, right? So you're still trying to push up to your old numbers, but then you're going to have to come back for a cycle and allow your body to recover. That's just the reality. Okay. If you're new, again, if you're a newbie, you can still take that same newbie approach and still increase volume over time, strength over time until you start to stall out. All right. That approach still works. You may not be as aggressive as a 25-year-old if you're, 60, but you can still see progress. Like there's no reason not to push, assuming you're doing the exercises correctly and the next variable, which I'll talk about, which is mobility. Okay. So let's talk about mobility. As we get older, we get stiffer, right? And some people are less stiff than others, right? Some people are hypermobile and they never will get that stiff. Okay. So I realize there's a spectrum here. But just appreciate you will get stiffer. That means you will need to warm up longer. So especially for the compound movements, don't just hop in and start grinding, because that over time, when you're 20, you can do that. When you're older, it's going to be a little harder. The downside, of course, is that if you only have 45 minutes to train, you're an older adult, you're probably busier, so forth. Your warm-up could creep into your training to the point where your training volume drops too much. And so you're going to have to be clever with how you do your warm-up then. So you might have your general warm-up, but as you're training, you are still warming up. So, as you're doing your squat sets, your warm-up sets and squat, let's say, you are doing mobility work as you're resting. Like, I would advocate for this anyway, no matter the age of the individual. What Eric Cressey calls fillers, right? They're just, you work on your ankle mobility while you're working on your warm-up sets for the squat. And then as you squat, continue to work on your ankle mobility. So you can still make things time efficient, but instead of just sitting on your butt like I would and just look at the bar and hope it gets lighter while you're looking at it, you are working on your mobility. You keep moving, okay? And then when you get on the bar, you're warmed up adequately. So again, this is going to take some strategery in order to get it all done, but I would highly recommend you really focus on greater mobility. Now, as we're older, the chances we just have more life happen. The chances of an injury having occurred is also going to be higher. I have many injuries to tend to. And so again, when you're younger and likely stronger and maybe you're more active or whatever it may be, those injuries didn't manifest themselves as much. But as you get older, because you get stiffer and maybe you're not as active in your job or whatever it may be, I don't know the circumstances, but the likelihood of that injury manifesting a problem, right, just joint wear and tear. If you've torn cartilage in the joint, you're going to start to get closer to bone on bone, right? If I'm talking about knees or something like that, right? You're going to have some cranky joints. And so spend the time to warm them up, right? Spend the time to warm them up. As part of that, now you're also going to have to think about, well, do I need to spend some extra time on those areas? And this could also be part of a warm-up. So for instance, if your back's getting worse as you get older, you may need to incorporate more spinal stability exercises. Well, you can do that as a filler in between. You do do some, I'll say plank, but what I'm always try to push towards is I call perturbation planking, right? So you're moving while you're planking. That's just one example, but whatever it is you're doing, that you're working on that trunk activity as a filler, right? You're going to have to actively be working on these shortcomings, if you will. Okay, more than when you're younger. You're like, it'll be fine. You probably were, but as you get older, you can't ignore those things. Not if you're going to train consistently. Okay, ultimately, the injury is what you want to avoid in maintenancing injuries. Right? You don't want those injuries. You don't want to get to the point where you're injured that you can't train. Okay, that doesn't make any sense, right? That you push yourself so hard that you end up injured. Now you can't train at all. And so backing the ego down and realizing you're older and that you need more recovery and you need more warm-up time and you need to maintenance those injuries with exercises that are appropriate, rotator cuff exercise, whatever it is. If you're an office worker and you've been seated for a long period of time for 15 years, your posture is probably screwed up. You're going to have to spend some time working on that. You can do that as a filler to make it time efficient. You're going to do some lower trap work. Okay? You're going to do some upper back work, potentially, if that's what's feeding into the posture issue. You're going to do some external rotation of your rotator cuff, whatever it may be. Okay? External rotation of your those external rotators of your rotator cuff. Okay? So those are things you have to incorporate, right? In other words, if you put this all together, you're going to have to be more thoughtful and you're going to have to be more strategic in how you train. Okay? And I find this interesting, maybe you won't, is that as we get older, aren't we supposed to be doing that anyway? Like, isn't that the whole point? As you get older, you mature, right? I see the world as a big adolescence mess right now. Like, even people my age act like adolescents. Well, we have to mature even in our training. We have to mature and say, okay, I can no longer do what I did before when I was 24. I have to recognize that, be mature enough to say I can't do that. I need to pull down the volume, the frequency. I need to maintenance these injuries a lot better, and I need to, right, in order to train. All right, last one is nutrition, right? So this all supportive stuff. Again, hopefully as an older adult, maybe you have a better job than when you were 20, and you maybe are more mindful of what you're eating. I'm not advocating and the very last video I made for this one was about feasting and enjoying food, and I'm all for that. But it is, if you're going to train hard, you have to take care of yourself. And so, the idea of good, and I made a video on this a long time ago, good and great, right? I feel good, but I don't understand what great is. Well, when you're young, you can eat and feel good, and you train, you don't really know there's another level, there's another great. When you get older, though, there's another level, because when you don't eat well, you feel like crap, right? Okay? And what I mean by eat well is fruits and vegetables, adequate amount of protein. And as we age, we need, a lot of the studies that have pushed protein intake are in older adults, really. They're a little skewed, but, and not to say they aren't important in younger individuals, but certainly as we age, we need more protein. And the reason we don't eat protein, if we're getting like older, as in 70 plus, right? Sometimes people don't want to chew the food. They're just not hungry. They're not active enough to be hungry, but we need to consume enough protein. Okay. And the protein range, like the typical, if it's off the kilos, right? 1.5 grams per kilogram is fine. You might be even a little higher though for an older adult. Okay. But weight training, absolutely critical as we age. You lose strength rapidly and skeletal muscle mass rapidly if you don't maintenance it. The old saying, if you either use it or lose it. Okay. But nutrition support is very important, more so than when you're younger. You have to be you have to be strategic again about how you eat around training and when you eat after training. If you don't know how to do that, I would highly recommend you find somebody you trust that does. Obviously I could upsell you here on my coaching, but anybody who knows what they're doing in the area of nutrition, like really knows, not just somebody that got a weekend certification, but like legitimately knows what they're doing, could be helpful here. But if you're going to train as an older adult, you have to be more mindful of what you're eating. So, carb type, fat type, meal timing, all those things. It doesn't have to be obsessive, okay? But there just needs to be improvement in order to sustain the kind of training that you're looking to do, okay? Because if you're worried about hypertrophy, you got to keep the volume up, right? So that's going to require good nutritional support, good recovery support. If you want to get stronger, you got to keep the load up. Same thing, right? You need this supplemental support, whether that's your warm up, whether that's nutrition, okay? And it goes without saying that getting as high quality sleep as possible too is helpful. And these are all very important things. Life stress is a big one. It's a little bit harder as an older athlete because the life stress of when you were 20 was, like my roommate's pissing me off. And now your lifestyle at 20 is like, oh crap, my taxes are due. Are they going to take my house? Right? So, it's a little different. But managing that life stress and the busyness of life is definitely one of the challenges as well when it comes to an older individual who's lifting for athletics or just otherwise. Sometimes there's not anything you can do about it. I work with clients all the time that have extraordinarily busy schedules. Again, it goes back to what I said a little bit earlier about understanding when you have time periods that you can go hard and time periods when you need to pull back, and appreciating that the time periods that maybe you're working 60-hour weeks and your schedule's sporadic, the best you can get in is 2 training days that week. Okay, who cares? Get them in. Don't try to get the normal 4 to 5 day in and grind it. Don't place a competition around a major deadline at work or something, something going on with your family, is going to occupy a lot of time. Husbands, if your wife is pregnant, don't schedule a meet right when she's going to give birth. Probably, like in the early days of it. I remember years ago I was looking at like kit cars, right? You buy a car and you build it, and I remember when the guy was like, these are the times not to buy this, and this is way too expensive. I couldn't afford it. I would love to do something like that. But I don't really know how to do it, but that's why I wanted to do it. But it was like, don't buy one of these if you're going to have a baby. So, you're just not going to have time, right, to work on it. It's going to sit in your garage. So the whole point with training as well is that just appreciate that, there may be times when you just can't go hard, and embrace that. Do what you can. And then when the storm clouds clear and you have time again, then you can go hard again. Now, if you're somebody who just can't go hard at all because you always are working 60-hour weeks, I hope that changes for you. I really do. That's a lot. And nothing wrong with working hard, but right. But if you can't, maybe you own a business and you love your business and you're working hard. Great. Just appreciate though, you might not see the gains that you want, or you might lose some of your gains, as a result of only been training twice a week. And just know that. But don't give up and just throw in the towel and say, I'm not going to train at all, right? That would be foolish too. More than likely, though, I think everybody's life goes through a season. If you're working 60 hours a week, you get promoted or you quit because you had enough or whatever, like that season will change, okay? I'm old enough now to see that, right? There's busy times and there's not as busy times. And when the times aren't as busy, that's when you have your opportunity to train hard, potentially work your way slowly back up to old volumes and old loads, potentially. It might take longer to get there than it was when you're younger, but you can do it. Okay. So just appreciate that, life schedule, definitely is part of this as well. Okay. I don't want to talk any circles. I try to outline these somewhat organized. They bleed together though, but in summary, volume, frequency, right? Mobility, okay? Nutrition support and life stress, right? Those are the big ones when it comes to adjusting how you train as you get older. And as you're an athlete, again, you have to adjust with those things as you get older. Right? You have to. I mean, you can try to smash yourself against the rocks, but if you want to push volume, but your diet's terrible and your life stress is high, you will increase the likelihood of getting hurt or burned out or all of the above. Okay, so if you want to charge ahead on strength and hypertrophy training, you're going to need all that support at its maximum as you age. The last thing I will say is don't stop training though, right? I've said this a few times in this video. If you haven't started training, start now. Like you can still see positive progress. If you want to do a weightlifting meet, okay, do one. But just appreciate this, by the way, with masters athletes is slowly roll a little bit, right? I mean, a lot of times as an older individual, we find a sport later in life and we get excited about it. We see some honeymoon phase gains, and then we chase the competition at the expense of being prepared for it. It's almost like what kids do as well, right? You chase the competition, but you're really not physically prepared for it. And you start to train harder and harder and harder, and you're just not physically ready, and then you start to pick up injuries. And some of them are significant. Okay? Embrace the long game. If you're 40 years old and you found a sport that you love and and you want to get into it, embrace the long game still. Okay? You're not going to catch up. You're not going to be a 24-year-old. It's not going to happen. But that's where masters athletes and athletics is great and fun, and embrace the long game. You can see progress. It's just going to take some time. Don't try to rush it. I've seen this happen a lot, is masters athletes end up getting hurt because they push harder than the younger kids. You have to slow them down. They're the harder ones to, I want to do this and I want to do that. And they want to achieve things, and that's great. I do too, as an older, right? But you just kind of have to slow your roll, right? Be patient. Okay. If you're in an activity that you don't have the mobility for, get the mobility first. Even if you see your success early, get the mobility before you start pushing hard, or you will get hurt. Well, that's a pretty big statement. It's likely you'll get hurt. Okay? So that's my kind of finishing exhortation here for those of you that are interested in masters athletes is slow your roll, right? Embrace the long game, and you can see continued success over time without destroying your body, and then you're out of the sport altogether. All right? All right, I'll see you in the next video.